What's up, City Life family? Welcome to church this weekend. And I want to say a big happy birthday. This actually is our anniversary weekend as a church. This coming Wednesday is the official day, but we are celebrating 1 year that we started our Southwest location. So happy anniversary to City Life Southwest. And then we're celebrating this week 13 years of God's faithfulness to us as a church, as City Life. And I'm just blown away and so grateful to God for all that he's enabled us to do these past 13 years. So happy birthday, everybody. Go eat some cake this afternoon. Just tell them it's my church's birthday. It's good. The calories don't count. We're starting a series today we're calling Serve the City. And this series really comes out of one of our core values as a church, which is that we serve our city with compassion. And so over the next 3 weeks, I want to speak to the heart of that core value, what it means and represents for us as a church. You know, about 2,000 years ago, there was a lawyer that came to Jesus with a question that he thought would be pretty difficult to answer. He said, Jesus, out of all of the commandments in the Old Testament, and there were a lot of them, hundreds of them, he said, which one is the most important? And Jesus, he didn't hesitate. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. That's the first and most important commandment. And the second one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus said, if you want to boil Christianity down to its primal essence, down to its most fundamental identity, it is to love God with everything that you are, with all that you have. Love God with your head, your heart, and your hands. It's a robust kind of faith that we're giving God our head, our hearts, our hands. And when we do all of that, it's so dynamic. Some of you, depending on your personality, one of those might come to you more naturally than another. I know some of you are analytical and you love to worship God with your mind, and you love to talk about theology and study the scripture and grow in your knowledge of God. That's awesome. And then some of you, you are all heart. You get in God's presence and it's tears and it's dancing, and you are just naturally able to enter into empathy toward others and what others are going through. Maybe for some of you, you're just really practical. You love to get your hands dirty. You love to build things and get stuff done and really serve God with all your strength and love your neighbor that way. And all of these are important. I see these differences, by the way, in my kids. I've got 4 of them. And they were with Leah, this was a few years ago, in the car, and they were driving and they came up to a red light, and there was a homeless man at the light who had a sign that said, hungry and homeless. And so Claire in the car, she is all heart in our family. And they had a container of cookies that Leah had made to deliver to somebody, fresh cookies. And so Claire said, Mom, please, can we just give the cookies to this man? And so they got out of the car and they came up to him with this sign, hungry and homeless, and they gave him the cookies, got back in the car. And as they started to pull away, kind of in the quiet of reflecting on the moment, Caleb jumped in from the back seat and he said, well, now he's just homeless. We did our part. It's up to you now, buddy, to take it the rest of the way from here. But, we all need a little bit of Claire, and we all need a little bit of Caleb. The head, the heart, the hands all comes into worshiping Jesus and living out really what is the Christian faith. And there were some researchers at Carnegie Mellon University. They wanted to understand what is it that motivates people to meet the needs of others around them. And so they did a little experiment and they brought some people in. And in this study, they had them all take just a random survey about some technology products. And they gave each of them, for taking the survey, 5 $1 bills. And it really wasn't for taking the survey. It's because they wanted them to have some cash on hand for the opportunity they were going to give them to donate to a charity. And so after taking the survey, they got the money, and then they gave them a support letter from an organization called Save the Children that provides food for kids who need it in Africa. And they split the group into two. And they gave the first group a letter from the organization that was really analytical and it was full of statistics, just breaking down the overwhelming need that exists in Africa for food for kids. And then the second letter they gave to the second group, and it really spoke to the heart. It actually, instead of the statistics, it just told the story of one girl named Rokia who really needed the food. And what they found is that the first group that got the analytical letter gave just over $1 on average to the organization. But the second group that got the letter with the one little girl's story in it gave almost $2.50 on average, more than twice as much as the first group. And it's a phenomenon that psychologists call the drop in the bucket phenomenon. And the drop in the bucket idea is that if we come to a problem that exists maybe in our world or around us from an analytical standpoint, it's very easy to become overwhelmed by the issue, problem, and then not do anything at all. In fact, they have found researchers that statistics can actually make people less generous over time, because what happens is the more you analyze it, it shifts into an analytical frame of mind, and the analytical frame of mind works against the compassionate heart at times. The more analytical you become, well, now all of the rationalization and the justification and the excuses come in that, man, this problem is so big and I'm just one person and what difference could I make anyway? And there are other people who are probably better gifted and better suited to make a difference, and this isn't really my fault that this problem exists, so why should it be my responsibility? And we start to analyze it, and what the research has shown is that the head can actually get in the way of the heart. And while we're called to love God with every dimension of our being, mind, soul, heart, strength, what I want to speak to in this series is, what does it look like for us to unleash the heart of Christianity? Because we've got to take what we know about God to be true and what we've learned about God to be true, and then it filters through our hearts and ultimately expresses itself outward through our hands to a broken world around us. And if that doesn't happen, if our hearts aren't moved to some extent, then what happens is that our hands just stay in our pockets, or our hands just stay folded across our chests in apathetic indifference, rather than our hands being outstretched like Jesus to a hurting world. So I want to speak to this, and we're just gonna unleash the heart of Jesus to our city. That's the goal. And I want to start today actually with some beautiful verses in Matthew chapter 5. This is within a larger sermon that Jesus gave called the Sermon on the Mount, where he was outdoors, probably seated on the side of a mountain in what would have been a natural amphitheater. And he's speaking to this crowd, and here's what he says. We're gonna read verses 13 to 16. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine, City Life, before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So I want to give you 3 principles from these verses, how you and I can make a difference through our lives and unleash the heart of Christianity to our city. And the first one is this: be present. Be present. Jesus says, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. There would have been a lot of applications coming out of this metaphor. One, we know that salt brings the flavor to food. It's a seasoning. It pulls the flavor out of the food. And so you and I have the privilege of being the seasoning on the street, and you can be the flavor in your family. And one of our superpowers as followers of Jesus is to experience joy no matter what we're going through. And so you're able to come into any environment, you're able to come into any no matter what circumstance somebody's experiencing, and bring the joy out and bring the flavor out. And that's how we can be the salt of the earth. But maybe the most profound implication of this picture in Jesus' day is that salt was a preservative. You gotta remember, in the first century, there were no deep freezers, no electricity, no refrigeration. And so how did you keep food from rotting and from spoiling? You packed it in salt. And the salt, as you stored it away in salt, would work its way into the parts of the food that were most prone to rot, most prone to spoil, and it would preserve the food, it would keep it fresh, it would keep it healthy. And in the same way, Jesus has called his people to be the preservative on this planet. We are not called as the church of Jesus to be separated from the world or to be isolationists in our approach to faith. We're not called to keep this thing bottled up within the four walls of a church building. The goal is to be present in the parts of the city that are most prone to rot, that are most prone to spoil. And as that happens, there's always, listen, in Scripture you see this pattern, there's always a relationship between the presence of God's people and the preservation of a place. And so you see in the Bible, God is committed. If there's a place where there's wickedness, where there's evil, he's gonna get his people there. Nineveh, Babylon, into the heart of the Roman Empire. And it wasn't always voluntary on the part of God's people. Sometimes he was a big fish. Sometimes there was a war even that he would allow in order to get his people present where they were needed the most. And so it's that presence that makes such a big difference. And that is really where this sense of calling started growing in Leah and I. When we moved to Philadelphia, packed up our moving van 14 years ago and moved into South Philly into a little row home, the desire was, man, God had given us this supernatural love for the city. We just wanted to live here and be present. And for a year, for more than a year before we ever had a public service as a church, we were just present and living and interacting. And it's true, listen, that there's need in the city and we have problems, and addiction is here and violence is here and injustice is here. But guess who else is here? Jesus is here, and thousands of people who love Jesus and are filled with his Spirit are here. We're here being present on mission for him. And we can make a difference as long as we're willing to be present. The purpose of the church is not to spend all week within the four walls of a church building. The purpose of the church is to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. And as the church, yes, we gather in a building to receive the word of God and to worship together and to build our faith and to experience community and fellowship with one another. But the purpose of the gathering is to lead to the sending. The purpose of this moment right now is that we can all scatter from this place this week with a divine sense of purpose and be present in our government jobs and be present in the schools and educational institutions of our city, and be present as servers in restaurants, and be present as artists and musicians and athletes in the city, and be present building businesses and meeting needs, and be present on social media, and be present as lawyers making a case in the courtroom, and as parents making disciples in the home, and as students influencing your friends at school. So be present. And what happens if the church isn't present? Here's the warning from Jesus. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. And I'll tell you, as a pastor, as someone whose job is to gather the people of God, this verse keeps me awake at night. Because if we're keeping it real, there have been and there are churches, and it can happen anywhere in the world, where the truth is they're no longer good for anything. It's our ability to be present. And what does it mean if we look at our city and we look at our world and it seems like it's in decay? It's so easy to start pointing fingers and start complaining, and we look around and we think government is really spoiling and families are spoiling and arts and entertainment, it's all, it's in decay. But who's responsible for that? Whose responsibility is it, according to Jesus, to bring the preservative and to bring the flavor? And so, man, think about the potential influence. When we get this right and you just show up, what would it look like to just sprinkle some salt this week in your office building? To just sprinkle some salt at the daycare, to sprinkle some salt in the courtroom, in the hospital where you work, with your clients. That's Jesus' vision. You are the salt of the earth. And so we're gonna be present, and then here's the second thought. He says, be bright. You're not just gonna show up, but when you show up, it's gonna be something different about you. Jesus says in verse 14, you are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. You know, in the city, we don't really experience total darkness ever. There's always like light coming in through the blinds somewhere. And yet I have been to parts of the world where I've experienced total darkness. I remember being in Africa several years ago, and we were in a remote part of Uganda in this village where there wasn't electricity for miles around. And so at night when the sun went down, that was it. Nobody was plugging in a computer. Nobody was turning any lights on. It was just total darkness. And if you've ever been maybe in a cave or in an environment where you experience just total utter darkness, you know a couple things. One, how disorienting that can be. And then secondly, the power of just one single stream of light. If you're in total darkness and somebody starts a fire, or somebody lights a lantern or one single candle, that even a single source of light is disruptive in the environment and dispels darkness. And let me just tell you, without the presence of God, this world would be in total darkness. We experience the effects of sin and darkness. It's disorienting. We sometimes take for granted the reality that God's presence and that God's grace is here in this world. And some of you have experienced this because you were living in darkness and you might not have described it at the time, but now that you're living with Jesus, you understand how little you were actually seeing of ultimate reality during that season of your life. And it could be that you were living in darkness, you were living in sin, but then what happens? I'll bet this is the story probably for 99% of us in the room. You met somebody. You met somebody that God brought into your life, and it wasn't just somebody who was waving a Bible around. It was somebody who walked the walk, somebody who lived it out, and they were bold, and they were gentle, and they were compassionate, and they spoke the truth, and they lived it out. And all of a sudden, that person coming into your life created a contrast for you between the life that you were living and the life that you knew and what could be possible. The lights got turned on. And if you pause and zoom out here in Matthew chapter 5, you see that's really the larger context of this chapter, because Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is giving us this countercultural, counterintuitive playbook. And when you read through the Sermon on the Mount, he's saying stuff like, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. We think, man, I thought the goal in loss was just to be as tough as you possibly can and barrel through it. But Jesus says there's actually blessing that comes when you slow down to grieve the loss. He's gonna say, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Wait a second. Looking around in the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, it seems like Rome is winning because they got the biggest armies and the most weapons. Merciful? Really? Blessed are the peacemakers. Wait, okay. If I show up that way at work, like I'm gonna get run over at my job. He says, blessed are those who are persecuted. Okay, Jesus, now you're just being silly. Well, he's just getting started. Now he really starts to amp it up. He says, you've heard it said, don't commit murder. I tell you, if you're even angry at somebody, in your mind, in your heart, you've already killed them in your heart. You've heard it said, don't lust or don't commit adultery. I tell you, even if you lust after somebody else and just objectify them in your mind, you've already committed adultery with them in your heart. You've heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Yep. That's the way the real world works. That's the way business and government works. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Jesus says, I tell you, if somebody strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek to them also. In other words, Jesus is just turning up the contrast Because we look at that and you say, man, all right, if I showed up at my firm, at my practice, living like that, I'm gonna be the only one. Exactly. That's the point. There's gonna be something different about you, where you live, where you work, where you play. One candle, one light can make an enormous difference. You're gonna stand out. Your life is gonna bring the contrast into your world. If you're following Jesus, listen, then just by your very presence, you show up at the business and you reveal the dishonesty in the business. You're invited to the party and you reveal the promiscuity at the party. You move into the street and you reveal the racism on the street, the stuff that people just did and said and took for granted that seemed normal, all of a sudden isn't normal anymore because the lights got turned on through your life. If your life, by the way it's ordered, by the way in which you respond to people, let's get real, because I have found it's a lot easier to act like Jesus than to react like Jesus. You know what I mean? But when you begin to shine the light of Jesus in the way that you handle pressure, in the way that you take criticism, by the way in which you treat the people who work under you, now the beauty of that is going to show up in the reality of your environment. And so you can be the stability in your dysfunctional family, and you can be the glue of your fractured office, and you can be the hope in your discouraged class, because a follower of Jesus is present and bright, and you are the light of your family, and the light in your office, and the light in that class, and the Spirit of Jesus is in you, and he's shining through you, offering hope and perspective and clarity and truth to the world around you. Jesus doesn't need his church to be in the majority in order to gain power or influence in this world. He just needs his people to be bold enough to let his light shine. And we can make a decision this fall to gain real influence in the world around us, that instead of just going to church, we're gonna be the church by being present and bright in the city to which he has called us. I'm just talking about unleashing the heart of it by being present and being bright, and then finally being practical. And I want to make this so simple today, how you and I can make a difference through our lives. Be practical. Let's keep reading in verse 15. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Verse 15 is really helpful because it clarifies what kind of light we are. And this takes the pressure off. You are not the sun in the sky. You are not the star in the universe or the star of the show. You're a lot more like a lamp. And you know the difference between the sun and the stars in a lamp. The sun and the stars have, their light is self-sustaining. They produce the light within themselves. But a lamp doesn't produce light, it just holds the light. It reflects the light. Jesus is the light of the world. You are filled with his Spirit. You hold that light, you reflect that light. And so the question is then, how do people make the connection between your life and the glory of God? And here it is, and it is so simple in verse 16, but we can forget this. In the same way, let your light shine before others. Why? So that they may see your good works. Everybody say good works. And give glory to your Father who's in heaven. When they see your good works, what's the response gonna be? It's tethered to the generous heart of God. In fact, I'll put it this way, and here's a thought you might wanna jot this down. Our good works are samples of God's generous heart. Our good works. It's how powerful they are. They're samples of God's generous heart. And if you are anything like me, you love samples. Anybody else shop at Costco? I'm not really into grocery shopping. Leah's kind of been empowered in our family to take care of the grocery shopping. I'm a little lost in a grocery store, but I don't mind going to Costco. Because at Costco, you got the sample engineers. That's what I call them, because you know those people have been to school to do what they do at Costco. Sample engineers. Anybody else ever come out of Costco with something you did not need? Something that you did not even know existed until that sample engineer drew you in with the smell and the demonstration and the beauty of it all. At Costco. At Costco, when we're there, Leah's likely to hear something like this from me as I begin to smell the smell, as I see it. Babe, why don't you go on ahead of me for a minute? I'm just gonna hang out here at the end of the aisle. See if I can connect with some people. Maybe start a life group of fellow samplers. See if anybody here needs a pastor. What happens when you come up to that booth and there's the sample, is the sample engineer, they start to pull out the bacon and they put that pita chip in your hand and they push over the exotic salsa. And now they're telling you about the love and the care, and the salsa comes from Cape Cod and the pita chip was sent over from Greece. And you're tasting the pita chip and the salsa, and now all of a sudden, man, I gotta have more. And so that's when they give you the good news. You go down there to the back of aisle 6, and there's more where this came from. Well, you know where I'm going, to the back of aisle 6. That's why you're coming out of Costco with pots and pans. You got pots and pans already, but not like these pots and pans. Nothing sticks to these pots and pans. And I'm standing there watching this guy, and I'm thinking, my dude, like, I need these pots and pans in my life. And that's what your good works produce. That's what an act of kindness is. Jesus says, the gospel, the pita chip, it's too amazing to keep it hidden in the back of aisle 6. We got to shine a spotlight on it. Come on, City Life family. Jesus is too incredible to keep him hidden in a church building one day a week. We got to get out of this building and into the streets and into our community and shine a spotlight on him. And that's what our good works accomplish when we connect with people and care for people and unleash kindness and generosity. We are pointing them to our God, who is the most compassionate, generous being in the universe. And we have the opportunity to say, this is just a sample, because I need you to taste and see that he is good. And there are too many people, listen, here's what's at stake. There are too many people, and they don't have a good taste in their mouth because of their encounter with the church. And our job is to put him in the spotlight through our good works. And here's my dream when I think about our church. And listen, if I could press a button and somehow have the power to just create any image of City Life in the community, this would be it. I would press that button, and I would want people to look at our church and say, that's the most generous, compassionate group of people around. And I don't even know if I believe everything that they believe, but those are people that are generous, that are living it out. And I don't know what I would do if they weren't here. And that's why we serve, and why we show up in the schools, and why we show up in the parks. And we've done our best to practice this as a church, even from the beginning, even before we ever had our first service. We were broke church planners, just pinching our pennies. But we would give away everything that we could just to let our city know God is generous. And, you know, to give away a t-shirt or a meal or a gift card or a free donut at Dunkin' Donuts is one thing, but let me tell you about the greater thing, and that is a God who gave the best that he had, the only son that he had, Jesus Christ. That's why we do Servolution. It is the oldest outreach tradition that we have as a church. And I'll tell you how Servolution started. It was an idea here, but this was the thought. What if we took a missions trip to Philly? You don't have to get a plane ticket. You don't have to get a hotel room. What if we just for 1 week served our city, blitzed it with acts of random kindness? And there are enough people saying the church just wants your money, which is not true. And so let's show them. What if we just gave it away? And we've given away hundreds of thousands of dollars through Servolution in the history of our church. Next week we're going to give away $25,000 through random acts of kindness. Showing up at Dunkin' Donuts and just paying for everybody who comes in. Showing up at the laundromat and paying for everybody who comes in. We're gonna take breakfast and gifts to teachers at 4 different schools and school assemblies. And on Friday night, 1 week from this coming Friday, we're packing 4,000 bags of groceries here in our gym that are gonna go out on Saturday, September 21st, to 4 block parties that are happening in 4 neighborhoods across our city. We're sponsoring one of those in Southwest Philly, and if you're looking for a way to get plugged in, there are opportunities all week long, Tuesday through Saturday, morning, afternoon, evening. The one where we need the most people is on Saturday, the 21st, at that block party, where we are just going to, our prayer is blow people away with the love and the generosity of the Lord. And I want to invite you to be a part. This is an all play for our church. And you can sign up, and so I hope that you'll do that today. We got some help in the lobby if you need it, but set aside about 10 minutes. There's a really simple background check that you're gonna take because we're gonna be working with kids and we're gonna be working with youth. And so we can help you with that. And then after you register, you're going to be able to sign up for the specific project that you wanna be a part of. But here's the goal. It's about letting our light shine so that people may see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. And here's the distinction that I wanna make as we close, and this is really important to understand theologically. I want to make it as simple as I can, but here it is. We are not saved by good works. We are saved for good works. If we get this backward or out of order, we end up perverting Christianity. You're not saved by your good works. There's nothing that you and I are going to do to impress God enough to earn and deserve and warrant salvation. Ephesians 2 verse 8 says, by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. So we're not walking around boasting about ourselves. We did nothing to earn it. It is all the grace of God. But when God touches your life with grace and begins to change you from the inside out, here's the result of that. Verse 10, we're his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. What that means is that before you were ever even born, God put you together with gifts, with a personality, with strengths, with things that you can do, things that you love to do. And when you simply do those things for others, you begin to glorify the Father in heaven. For some of you, you're God's workmanship when it comes to cars. Like he gave you an ability to take cars apart and put them back together and do things for cars that if it was up to me, that car would never run again. But for you, if you get some grease in your fingers and a wrench or a gasket in your hand, you come to life. Like that's your divine to-do list. It's just taking that ability and helping somebody fix their car. For some of you, it's delivering a meal. And once you get onto Pinterest, you come alive and you're working with monogrammed napkins and matching colored cups and straws with shapes on them. I'm talking to somebody right now. And you got the asparagus and the alfalfa sprouts and a shank of lamb, and you're coming over to that neighbor with 3 kids and her husband travels, and you're just like, keep the bowls. It's your divine to-do list. And we were saved not by our good works, but so that the grace and light of Jesus in our lives could come through that workmanship, what God has gifted us to do to make a difference in the lives of others. And as we begin to do that, God begins to move. And I'll leave you with this. Here's why this is so powerful. Good deeds create goodwill, and goodwill gives us the platform to share the good news. That's what we want to do, just unleash the heart and the hands of our faith. Thank you, Jesus, for including us in your divine mission. And where we've complicated things, I pray that you would help us to get back to the basics, to represent authentic Christianity in our day. to love you with the mind, to love you with the heart, with all of our soul, with all of our strength, and to love our enemies with radical generosity. God, I pray that you would show up and show out through this church and through every church in our city, that you would be lifted up and glorified.